Hello students, welcome to this program titled Science of Teaching, Relation between Teaching and Learning and Factors Affecting Teaching Process. The objectives set for the present session are to know the concept of teaching, to know the teaching as science, to understand the relation between teaching and learning, to know different variables of teaching and learning. Teaching-learning process has occupied an important place in the field of education. Teaching and learning are two fundamental aspects of educational process. Both are closely related to each other. One cannot be divorced from the other. The most important objective of teaching is to facilitate learning. Whenever there is teaching, there will be learning. Thus, the concept of teaching is incomplete without learning. For understanding the teaching-learning process, it is essential to study the concept of teaching and learning. Concept of teaching. Teaching, in simple terms, is referred to as either an occupation or profession of a group known as teachers, or an activity or activities of a group undertaken to help an individual to learn or acquire some knowledge, skills, attitudes, or interest. However, the meaning and concept of teaching is not so simple. It's very complex, social, cultural, and ethical process designed in a social or cultural context. Teaching is a relationship which makes a child to develop all his powers. Teaching is the stimulation, guidance, direction, and encouragement of learning. Traditional concept of teaching. Teaching is an act of imparting instruction to the learners in the classroom situation. It is traditional classroom teaching. In traditional classroom teaching, the teacher gives information to students, or one of the students reads from a textbook while the other students silently follow him in their own textbooks. This traditional concept of teaching is not acceptable to modern educators. Now, teaching is not merely imparting knowledge or information to students. While imparting knowledge, teachers should keep in mind the child as well as the orderly presentation of subject matter. The modern concept of teaching. Teaching is to cause the pupil to learn and acquire the desired knowledge, skills, and also desirable ways of living in the society. It's a process in which learner, teacher, curriculum, and other variables are organized in a systematic and psychological way to attain some predetermined goals. Some experts weave about the concept of teaching like Smith's view. In the words of B.Ed Smith, teaching is a system of actions intended to produce learning. Morrison's view. According to H.C. Morrison, teaching is an intimate contact between a more mature personality and a less mature one, which is designed to further the education of the learner. Green's view. Thomas F. Green observes that teaching is the task of teacher which is performed for the development of a child. Gates' view. Teaching is a form of interpersonal influence aimed at changing the behavior potential of another person. Edmund Emerson's view. Teaching is defined as an interactive process primarily involving classroom talk which takes place between teachers and pupils and occurs during certain definable activities. Now, teaching as science. There is both an art and science dimension of effective teaching. The science dimension entails a comprehensive knowledge of the discipline. Both historical foundations and research on the frontiers. The artist dimension, which is likely to be more exclusive of the two, involves presenting complex material to students in terms that are readily understandable. Teaching as a science involves effective techniques. Teaching follows research-based practices to promote students' achievement. Science of teaching involves generalizations from the research about effective teaching. Silverman 1978 defines teaching like the practice of medicine which is very much like art that calls for the exercise of talent and creativity. But like medicine, it's also a science, for it involves a repertoire of techniques, procedures and skills that can be systematically studied and described and improved. A good teacher, like a doctor, is one who adds creativity and inspiration to the repertoires. Relation between teaching and learning. Teaching and learning are integrally related to each other. They are inseparable entities. They are supplementary and complementary to each other. They are like two sides of the same coin. For having insight into the concept of teaching, it's important to know the concept of learning and also its relationship with teaching. Teaching is causing the child to learn. It is the stimulating and direction of learning. It's helpful to the people to make effective adjustment. Learning is another name for making adjustments. Teaching is guiding people's activity and training of emotions which promote learning. In the words of Burton, teaching is the stimulation, guidance, direction and encouragement of learning. There can be no efficient learning without conducive learning situation. Good teaching means maximum learning, whereas teaching should be made the central concern of the process of education. The learning in turn should be made a central theme and goal for every teaching. Reasons for relating teaching to learning. Burton has given the reason for relating teaching to learning. The first is teaching can become effective only if it's related to learning. Teaching objectives can be realized by creating appropriate learning situations. They cannot be realized without being related to learning situations. The appropriate teaching conditions or structures may be generated for effective learning. The effective teaching aids may be selected for creating learning. Effective teaching strategies and tactics may be selected to achieve the optimal objective of learning. The concept of relationship of teaching and learning will be an aid to understand the nature of teaching. Teaching theories may be evolved. The knowledge of teaching-learning relationship will be helpful for teacher educators to produce effective teachers. Teaching principles based on the learning principles. Both teaching and learning have separate principles, but both depend upon each other's principles. Learning takes the help of teaching principles and teaching takes the help of learning principles. Good teaching is characterized by the observance of certain basic general and psychological principles. Like a skillful artist, a teacher should know these principles which would help him to acquire proficiency in his profession. These principles of teaching are mostly based on the principles of learning. According to some educationists, the following are some of the important principles of teaching which are based on the principles of learning. Good teaching involves skills in guiding teaching. Good teaching is kind, sympathetic and cooperative. Good teaching is well planned. Good teaching is suggestive. Good teaching is democratic. Good teaching takes into account the past experiences of the learner. Good teaching is stimulating. Good teaching diagnoses difficulties. Good teaching is remedial. Good teaching liberates the learner. Teaching principles and characteristics of learning. Learning experience. Teaching should provide learning experience for mutual integration of thinking, feeling and doing. Teaching should provide learning experience in meeting the needs of the learner. Goal-oriented learning. Teaching should provide goal-oriented learning. Guidance. Teaching should provide appropriate guidance to the learner to achieve his goal. Creative powers. Teaching situation should provide freedom to develop creative powers. Individuality of the learner. Teaching should be organized in such a way that needs, interests, abilities, aspirations, previous achievement and family background of the learners are taken into account. Social attitude. The entire range of classroom interaction should be cooperative, group process as to develop social attitudes in the learners. Now we'll discuss meaning of variables. Any factor which is varied or is liable to vary in a learning situation is known as variable. A variable factor in a learning situation is that factor which is liable to change, and with this particular change, the results tend to be different. A variable has been defined as any response or behavior which can take different degrees. In teaching learning process, the variables range from the content to be transacted to the attitude of the learner. The same content can be transacted in different ways depending on the desired outcome. Learners differ both amongst each other and within each other, like in terms of ability, interest in a particular discipline, etc. Teacher behavior varies from class to class and from teacher to teacher. Just example, if the learner is properly motivated before learning, the results tend to be better as compared to the situation when the learner has not been motivated. Similarly, if the learner is interested in the specified act of teaching, he will give better results. So this interest on the part of the learner becomes a variable factor. Of all the possibilities, variables may be the following: learning task. The learning task is what the teaching learning process is intended to accomplish. It can be assessed by the instructional objectives. For example, when transacting content about environmental pollution, the instructional objectives can be that at the end of lesson, the learner will define environmental pollution, causes of environmental pollution. Second, learner behavior. Learner behavior comprises collective displayed by the learner. Learner behavior comprises collective actions by the learner. Learner behavior is different at the point in time they begin to participate in teaching learning process. It varies during the process and finally at the end of the process. Teacher behavior. The essential task of the teacher is to arrange the conditions of the learner's environment so that the process of learning will be actuated, supported, enhanced and maintained. Teacher behavior will vary from teacher to teacher and from one learning situation to another. This variable can be broken down into various components like teacher personality, teaching style, teacher expectation, teacher competence, professional knowledge and understanding, professional skill and abilities, etc. Broadly speaking, a teaching process has three variables. First, the teacher. The teacher is an independent variable. The planning, organizing, leading and controlling of the teaching is carried on by the teacher. He has the freedom to perform the activities of providing the learning experiences to the students. Second, the people. The people is the dependent variable because the teaching has to be active in accordance with the planning, organization and presentation. The learning or performance of the student is influenced by teaching activities. Third, the content and teaching methods. The content of teaching, methods of teaching, strategies and tactics of teaching, and the techniques of motivation have been termed as the intervening variables. Interaction between teacher and people, teaching method and the nature of teaching material takes place through the intervening variables. Types of variables. Structure of teaching comprises three variables which operate in the process of teaching and creating learning conditions or situations. That we said, independent variable, that's teacher. In the process of teaching, the teacher plays the role of an independent variable. He is responsible for the functioning of dependent variable, that is, the students. He does the planning, organizing, leading and controlling of teaching so the desirable outcomes of his teaching may be properly obtained. He is free to perform various activities for providing learning experiences to the pupils. He has to handle his teaching activities and all the intervening variables in such a way that the desired mobility and function ability can be created among his students for achieving the teaching objectives. In the words of Kothari Commission, of all different factors which influence the quality of education and its contribution to national development, the quality, competence and character of teachers are undoubtedly the most significant. Dependent variable, that students. The student is the dependent variable in the process of teaching because student has to act according to the planning and organization of the teacher. Teaching activities of the teacher influence the learning or performance of the students. In other words, the pupil's behavior depends upon teaching. Intervening variable, that is content and strategy of presentation. The content of teaching, strategy, tactics of teaching and techniques of motivation are known as intervening variables. These variables are responsible for bringing desirable interaction between teacher and the taught by producing proper teaching environment, teaching material and facilities and creating appropriate learning conditions or environment. It should be noted that the intervening variable, as it sounds, do not exist for creating some interference or obstacles in the functioning of independent or dependent variables. Rather, they help in the smooth functioning of these variables for realization of teaching objectives. All these variables are interrelated. Each one is important in its own way. Each one refines the other, itself refined in turn thereto. Functions of teaching variables. The teaching variables have an important place in the process of teaching. Three functions performed by the independent and dependent variables are: first, diagnostic function, second, remedial function, and third, evaluative function. First, diagnostic functions. Teacher as an independent variable is more active in this function. The goal is to bring desirable change in the behavior of the students. The initial task needs a proper diagnosis for the prescription of appropriate treatment or the actual attempts for bringing desirable behavioral change in the students. The teacher has to consider only two things under the diagnostic function. The first is pupil and the second is content. The teacher first of all has to diagnose the entering of the learner. Then he arranges the structure of the taught in a sequence for writing teaching objectives in behavioral terms. The diagnostic function is the foundation of the remedial aspect of the teaching. This function is performed in accordance with the pre-active phase. This function helps the teacher to take decisions about different aspects like analysis of the teaching problems. The teacher has to analyze the teaching problems. Hence, he should decide what the entering behavior of the students while giving an intelligent thought to the problem related to the content which is to be studied by the students. It's also to decide whether that content is according to their capacity or not. It means that the teacher should take the decisions concerning the students and the content so that the desired objectives may be achieved. It should be noted that the decision taken by the teacher regarding the entering behavior of the student and the contents to be taught proves useful for the remedial aspects of interactive phase of teaching. Determining the entering behavior. The second variable of diagnostic aspect is to determine clearly the entering behaviors of the students. Initial potentials in terms of cognitive, affective and cognitive abilities of the students should be properly diagnosed with the help of some diagnostic tests. After this, the teacher should present new knowledge to the students. After presenting the new knowledge, the information of change in the behavior of students will be easy to acquire. Hence, for determining the entering behavior of the students, the teacher should prepare and use such evaluative questions, keeping in view the reliable and valid contents, recognizing individual differences. Another variable of diagnostic aspect is the consideration of individual differences of the students. Every individual has different interests, abilities, attitudes, capacities, and needs. The teacher should teach in accordance with individual differences of the students. He should perform the teaching task at the average level on the one hand and guide sympathetically the gifted and backward students on the other hand. It will lead the teaching to the achievement of the objectives with success. Task analysis. The teacher should analyze carefully the learning activities related to the contents because the success or failure of the lesson depends upon the task analysis. Content analysis in the view of types of learning. The last variable of the diagnostic aspect is the analysis of the content with regard to the type of learning. The teacher should know the nature of learning for content analysis in view of types of learning. He should also know the strategies, techniques, and principles to be used in the various situations so that teaching may become easy, interesting, and effective. Student and diagnostic function. Although the teacher as independent variable is more active in exercising diagnostic functions, yet the role of a student as dependent variable cannot be ignored. He has to perform the important diagnostic functions on the basis of his perception for his abilities and responses like entering behavior. He has to diagnose the strength and weaknesses of his entering behavior on the basis of his perception for his activities and responses. Self-assessment. He has to assess himself in terms of tools of learning like language and comprehension, ability to express, think, analyze, psychomotor skills, and emotional behavior. Efforts for initiation and response. He has to make efforts for knowing about the behavior of the teacher, the types of teaching strategies, the nature of the content and instructional material for the purpose of initiation and response. Second, prescriptive functions. Prescriptive function is related to the preparation of proper planning. Teaching methods, strategies, and tactics are decided under the prescriptive function. In this function, pupils and teachers take decision about their relationship. Teacher performs prescriptive functions by controlling dependent and intervening variables. Prescriptive functions include the activities like selection of subject matter. The teacher selects appropriate content and organizes them into proper sequence. Selection of teaching strategies and tactics. The teacher selects proper teaching strategy and tactics in view of the individual differences among the students. Selection of feedback devices. The teacher selects feedback devices according to the individual differences among the students. Feedback is the soul of successful teaching because feedback provides reinforcement to the pupils, which in turn provides motivation and encouragement for learning. Hence, at the time of teaching, the teacher should provide necessary feedback by using praise and blame, techniques for motivating and encouraging the students so that the teaching objectives may be achieved by providing maximum learning experiences and desired behavioral change in the students. Seek cooperation. The teacher has to seek essential cooperation from the student for a useful and purposeful interaction. Teacher remains more active than the students in the performance of prescriptive functions. Teacher has to make his best effort to bring change in the students' behavior. He motivates the students by providing appropriate feedback in different ways while keeping in mind the individual differences among the students. Appreciation, rewards, and encouragement are included in various techniques of feedback. The student should give sincere cooperation to the teacher in exercising various prescriptive functions. He should help teacher in demonstration, etc. Evaluation functions. The evaluative function is considered to be the most important function of the whole teaching system. Teaching process will remain incomplete without this function. It's concerned with evaluating the effectiveness of prescriptive functions, which may be decided in the form of realization of stipulated objectives. If the objectives could not be realized, it shows that prescriptive functions are not appropriate. Students should not be blamed for this weakness, but the weakness of the prescriptive functions should be properly diagnosed. Some serious mistakes in prescribing or carrying out the treatment shall be found. Prescriptive functions should be modified and improved so that the objectives may be achieved. The evaluative functions has three main activities. First, construction of criterion test. Evaluation of teaching is very essential. It tells about the achievements. Objective type tests, short answer type tests, and essay type tests are important examination systems. Achievement tests, the knowledge of subject matter. They provide clear information regarding the changes brought in the behavior of pupils by remedial teaching. Objectivity, reliability, and validity are the important characteristics of the criterion test. The teacher should construct the criterion test with great care. It's essential to standardize these tests. Evaluation of behavioral change. Evaluation of pupils' behavioral change is another important variable of evaluation aspect. Various evaluation devices in the form of tests, observation, interviews, rating scales, inventories, and projective techniques are used for this purpose. Diagnostic phase. The diagnostic phase is the last variable of evaluation. The diagnostic phase means to know by evaluation the extent of success of teaching, the extent to which the teaching objectives have been achieved as the result of the methods or strategies or tactics at the time of teaching. If the teaching objectives have not been achieved as a result of their use, then the planning, organization, leading, and controlling of the teaching process should be repeated. Thus, modification should be brought about. In contrast to the diagnostic or prescriptive functions, the students remain more active in the evaluative functions. He has to diagnose the items of criterion test and then has to give response. The student diagnoses the items on the basis of his achievement, abilities, and skills. He attempts to check the correctness of his responses. The teaching functions are similar to a medical doctor. The main job of a doctor is to diagnose and give a prescription. Thus, the source of teaching functioning is like medicine. Professor B.O. Summit states that knowledge and understanding of teaching function is basic information theory of teaching. The theory of teaching explains the relationship of variables and their structure. This is all related to our today's topic, that's science of teaching, relationship between teaching and learning, and the factors affecting teaching process. Hope you have enjoyed and understood. Thank you for watching.